If there's one area of Titanfall 2 that I feel comfortable criticizing, it's probably the map design. Not to imply that Titanfall 2's maps are bad, but just a bit disappointing in my opinion, especially when you consider how excellent the maps were in the original Titanfall. Keep in mind that all of my opinions on map design are just that. They're opinions based on my playstyle preferences and may differ from yours. One of my biggest issues with the map design in Titanfall 2 is how many maps feel overly safe. Blackwater Canal, Boomtown, and Complex all highlight this problem the most. These maps aren't necessarily bad, they just feel a bit stale and repetitive with 3 lanes, 2 bases, and obvious power locations and high ground. While I don't think that these maps detract from the experience, they don't really add to it either. I can't honestly remember any maps in the original Titanfall that fell into this trap, and I really hope that Titanfall 3 can take a few more risks when trying to design play spaces. I don't mind if there's a map or two that go for the standard approach, but I think it becomes more of an issue when most of the maps seem to be based on this layout. Another issue with many of the maps is how they interact with the overall gameplay sandbox. I touched on this a bit before when talking about weapon balance, but I think I should go a bit more in depth. Some of the maps really limit you to using certain weapons, abilities, titans, and movement techniques, which really hampers the variety in each match and makes the map really predictable. I would say that Rise, Colony, and Forward Base Kodai are the most egregious offenders of this problem. On Rise, I honestly feel that you're playing at a massive disadvantage if you aren't using Grapple. Grapple itself is already a bit too good if you ask me, but on Rise it's on a different level entirely. Being able to access the upper wall running areas is such a massive advantage that I can't really justify using anything else. Colony has a similar problem, but instead of the ability set, it encourages the use of certain weapons. Colony is probably the worst map for G2 and Spitfire camping, since the rooftops give players complete line of sight on the rest of the map. While other maps like Angel City and Homestead have similar problems, there's at least some differences in elevation and line of sight blockers to help remedy the situation. Colony is still a great map for Last Titan Standing in my opinion, but I don't really enjoy playing on it as a pilot. And lastly, Forward Base Kodai has a lot of issues with Titan balance. The upper middle portion of the map is vital for winning Titan engagements, but it's also very open with very few line of sight blockers. This gives a massive advantage to ranged defensive Titans like Ion and Tone, while close range Titans like Scorch and Ronin, and Titans that depend on cover like Northstar and Monarch, find themselves with very few options and areas to properly engage in. Not that these Titans are useless on the map, but they feel a lot more restricted and less fun to play in my opinion. I hope that I've illustrated this point enough. While you may argue that incentivizing the use of certain parts of the sandbox makes these maps play out differently to others, I think varied gameplay could be achieved more effectively by encouraging the use of every weapon, titan, and ability so that you can play a different way each match and face different challenges. Now the next point I want to bring up is kind of hard to label. I don't want to say design philosophy because I'm not sure it was Respawn's intention for many of the maps to play out this way. But with Titanfall 2's map and ability design, I've noticed that maps play out quite differently from the original game. I would describe the majority of Titanfall 1's maps to be what I call chain maps. These maps encourage players to chain different pieces of map geometry together through the use of its movement techniques to create your own routes. But in the sequel, I think it plays out a bit differently. I would describe Titanfall 2's map design to be what I call launchpad maps. These maps encourage players to use the environment to gain a massive boost in forward momentum through the use of abilities, slide hopping, and wall run speed boosts. Both of these map types have their merits, and I would say that chain map design rewards player investment and understanding of map layouts, while launchpad map design gives players a sense of free-form map traversal and grants players more freedom with their movement. So for Titanfall 3's map design philosophy, I would love to see both of these elements come together. Give each map a unique layout that feels different from each other and rewards players who put the effort into understanding its routes and paths, while still having a few opportunities for free-form map traversal. Now originally I had a section of this video where I talked about removing slide hopping. However, slide hopping is an aspect of Titanfall that I've changed my opinions on so many times, to the point where I'm not really sure whether I like it or not. On one hand, slide hopping allows players to maintain their speed through timing and precision, but on the other hand, it also allows players to completely avoid large sections of the map geometry. Slide hopping allows players to launch themselves without any consequence, since they don't need to be concerned about where they'll end up. For this reason, I actually don't think that slide hopping is really a skill-based mechanic, and it relies more heavily on muscle memory than skill. I think Titanfall would actually be a more skill-based game without slide hopping, since players would need to be a lot more aware of the different paths and routes on each map. But even though I think removing slide hopping would make Titanfall more skill-based, I can't help but feel that removing it would also make the game less fun. Slide hopping is a lot like grapple in many ways. It has a massive overbearing impact on the gameplay, but at the same time I don't think it has a negative impact on the gameplay. And like grapple, at this point slide hopping is almost core to Titanfall's identity. While I personally think that removing slide hopping would make the game more skill-based, I don't think it would make the game more fun. So I'll just leave it there, I guess, and let you guys explain your own thoughts on slide hopping down in the comment section. Let me know what you guys think, since this is something that I would love to hear another perspective on. If I had to choose one side or the other, I would probably want to see slide hopping be removed. But ultimately, this series isn't about what I want, it's about what I think would be best for the future of the Titanfall franchise. The next aspect of map design that I want to go over focuses on how I think map layouts should be constructed. Now, I'm not a AAA level designer, and like everything else in this video series, the developers over at Respawn know a lot more about level design than I do. I'm not going to try and tell Respawn how to do their job, but rather just give my opinion on 3 areas of map design that are really important to me personally when I think about the Titanfall experience. These are verticality, predictability, and interactivity. These are 3 aspects of level design that were actually done really well in either Titanfall 1 or 2, but I also think that neither game has struck a perfect balance. It's not something that I fault Respawn for, since these aspects of level design are extremely difficult, if not impossible, to properly balance, since in many situations, I think they're somewhat at odds with each other. I like to think of it like a pie chart. The more you increase one area, the smaller the other areas get. For example, a massive increase to interactivity and verticality will take away from the predictability element of a map. It probably isn't as cut and dry as I make it out to be, and I'm sure the level designers over at Respawn would have much more valuable insight than I do. But I'm getting a bit off track here, and now I want to try and break down what I mean when I say verticality, predictability, and interactivity. When I say verticality, I'm talking about how much play space exists on the vertical axis, how meaningful that play space is, and how well it blends with the horizontal play space. I could try to explain this further, but I'm a visual learner and prefer practical examples. In my opinion, one of Titanfall's best maps of verticality is Glitch. One of the things I appreciate the most about Glitch is how it uses the out-of-bounds areas on the map. A good example of this is the center of the map with the 3 large beams. Standing on these beams is out of bounds, but you can still use these to slide off of and chain wall runs together. Utilizing the upper portion of center map gives you a great advantage over people who are directly underneath you, along with excellent visibility of the enemy team's base. But at the same time, enemies who are playing a bit further back have excellent line of sight on you when you're up here, making it so the height advantage is still counterable. Glitch also avoids one of the biggest problems with many of Titanfall 2's maps. This issue being that vertical access is almost exclusively restricted to players using grapple. Glitch gets around this problem by incorporating what I call vertical chains. These are pieces of map geometry that allow players to traverse the map on the vertical axis rather than just horizontally. The best example of this I can find is those floating curved wood walls on either side of each base, but these are also present on the left and right flanks and through clever use of the central wall run routes to jump onto the round-tree platforms. But one other somewhat underappreciated element of Glitch is how it utilizes verticality to balance pilot versus Titan gameplay. While many other maps are a bit safer, using the comfort of buildings and cover to regulate when a Titan can or can't attack a pilot, Glitch is different with how exposed the pilots are. But with proper use of vertical movement techniques, pilots can make themselves much harder for enemy Titans to effectively target. This not only adds a bit more tension to the match when pilots know that they're never safe, but in my opinion, it also does a much better job with pilot and Titan interplay. On many of Titanfall 2's other maps, it feels almost like I'm playing 2 separate games at the same time, whereas on Glitch, each match feels much more cohesive. I could honestly spend 15 minutes analyzing why Glitch is such a masterfully created map, but my videos are already long enough and I should probably move on. I hope I did a decent job at explaining how verticality is extremely beneficial to Titanfall's map design, and if you guys want to continue the conversation about Glitch, feel free to leave your own insights in the comments section. But now let's talk about predictability. When I say predictability, I'm referring to how much a player can anticipate where and what is attacking them, along with understanding the different degrees of safety and risk in various locations. This is an aspect of overall game design that relates to many more areas than just map design, but I would argue that its impact on how maps play out warrants its own discussion. The real conversation about predictability in Titanfall revolves around map layouts. This is one of the areas of Titanfall 2's overly safe map design that is actually beneficial, and most of Titanfall 2's maps do a pretty good job in this regard. So for predictability in particular, I'm going to use an example of a map that does this poorly instead of a map which does this well. In my opinion, Relic is a map which has fairly poor predictability. The most obvious part of the map that I take issue with is the crash ship in the middle. This may as well be a giant block of Swiss cheese, and whenever I run in, it's practically a dice roll. Sometimes I live, and sometimes I die, but I can rarely anticipate where or what is going to kill me. I have absolutely no idea where the safe and risky areas of the map are, since there are so many different approach angles and sight lines to worry about. Let's use the right side of one of the team's spawns. I walk into this little room onto the balcony. To be fair, I know that I'm safe from behind since I just spawned there, but still, from this location I can be killed from the opposing side room, balcony, main door, small door, left side room, center hole, and the left side hallway. Getting killed here is extremely frustrating since I feel that the map is cheating me, and it makes me want to avoid the center area altogether. But to be honest, each side of the map isn't too much better. This side of the map is particularly bad. Not only are there 4 different rooftops and buildings that I can be shot at from, but there's also these little beams which are safe havens for campers. I really don't know why these aren't out of bounds, and camping up there is extremely cheap, since if I target those areas of the map, I'm leaving myself exposed to all the other rooftops where there are bound to be more players. But I honestly can't blame people who camp on Relic, since the alternative is rolling the dice in the center of the map. It's not nearly as bad as some other games that I've played, but whenever Relic comes up in the rotation, my heart sinks a little bit. Although I must admit that Relic has had one unintended side effect of making me appreciate Pulse Blade users. But for Titanfall 3, I hope Respawn can avoid these kinds of Swiss cheese maps, as it really encourages camping and discourages aggressive play. That's just my perspective though, and I'm sure there are many players who enjoy Relic. I would describe my playstyle as calculated aggression, and maps like Relic take away from the calculated part of that equation. If you thrive in chaos, I can see how you might like this map design quite a bit, which is absolutely fair. And this brings me to the last aspect of map design that I'll discuss in this video: interactivity. I remember back in Titanfall 1, there were these turrets placed on the map that players could activate for some extra fire support. I thought this was actually a really cool feature, and it was a bit sad that it didn't return in Titanfall 2. But I think that the Titanfall formula could go even further with the idea of interactive maps. One issue I have with not just Titanfall, but with all multiplayer games, is that the maps often feel really dead. Titanfall 1 actually did this much better than most games, but it was replaying Titanfall 2's campaign that I realized how much better it could be, specifically the mission Into the Abyss. Throughout this level, there are several locations where you can use moving platforms to proceed through the mission or avoid various different hazards. I would love to see some of these ideas on multiplayer maps. Imagine a wall in the center of the map that slowly spins in a circle, and depending on when you wall run on it and how fast you're going, you could use it to access multiple different routes. Or maybe a fan blade that turns off every few seconds, and if you time your slide, you can make it through. Or do you guys remember the cranes in the mission The Beacon? What if there was a crane that moved a wall back and forth to enable different routes based on its position? You could even use the wall hang feature to ride on it. Or maybe even a pilot-controlled crane that carries a platform that Titans could stand on, allowing you to transport your teammates across for a sneaky flank or quick escape. The more I think about this, the more ideas that come to mind. If any of you have ever played the Halo games, you would probably remember the grav lifts and man cannons that could launch you across the map. Titanfall seems like the perfect franchise for those. And maybe you could even mix in some thematic elements as well. Maybe there could be a snowy map set on a cold Arctic planet where you could slide with increased speed over the ice. One of my friends had the idea of a frozen lake where explosives could break the ice and pilots or Titans that fall in would die. But after a short period of time, the water would freeze over again. If you wanted to get really crazy, you could even have a map based on the Effect and Cause mission, where there would be a time shift every few minutes that alters the layout in different ways. Now that might be going a bit too far and could mess with map flow, but I think it illustrates my point nonetheless. There are so many opportunities for cool interactive map designs that I think would really complement Titanfall's movement and gameplay. While some of these ideas could be very risky, if done well, I think some of them could really add a lot to the experience. One of the best ways that a game can keep players interested is by allowing them to create their own custom content. Again, let's take Halo for example with its Forge mode and custom game options. What originally started as a tool to change spawn points, weapons, and small pieces of cover grew into an integral part of the Halo experience. As someone who has been making maps in Forge mode since Halo 3 first launched, I can say with absolute certainty that a map editor will strengthen your community more than you could ever imagine. You would be surprised at how talented some community members are at creating high-quality play spaces, and Titanfall's mobility and sandbox would be a dream come true for the more creative players in the Titanfall fanbase. The best thing about a map editor is how much it caters to different types of players. From completely wacky minigames to hardcore competitive maps, there are bound to be map creators out there who are willing to supply their respective communities with new content. It also helps to take the load off of the developers during content droughts or after they've stopped supporting the game. Additionally, if Respawn wanted to add some new game modes or maps to matchmaking, they wouldn't always need to make that content themselves, and could work with the community to freshen up multiplayer. This could be really effective for the Double Merit Weekend that I was talking about last video, which could feature some crazy community-created maps and game modes. If done well, this is a feature that is guaranteed to be a massive hit, and will be commended by the community for years to come. Now, the one downside of including a map editor is that it takes away from the excitement of developer-made content drops. This could impact DLC sales, but if Titanfall 3 has free DLC like Titanfall 2 does, this wouldn't really be an issue. And if you included new objects and options for the map editor with each DLC release, then the excitement for each DLC would be even greater than if there was no map editor at all. I also think that keeping players invested and interested in your game will translate to more microtransaction sales. And while players are generally unsympathetic towards microtransactions, I actually think that Titanfall 2 did an excellent job at offering some great cosmetics for a reasonable price. But I'm getting a bit off topic here, and I'll talk more about microtransactions in a later video. The point I'm trying to make is that a map editor would go a long way in retaining an audience post-launch, which will keep the franchise more relevant and incentivize players to support the game longer and purchase microtransactions. It's a win-win situation that I think both the developers and community will benefit from, and is probably the feature at the very top of my Titanfall 3 wishlist. There is, however, one massive barrier to discuss when talking about a map editor, and it's that Titanfall's maps need to be compatible with the game's AI. While enemies like grunts, stalkers, and reapers could simply be disabled for user-created maps, I can't see a way around the auto-titan problem. Maybe there would need to be a system in place for players to set certain pieces to be considered the map floor, and by doing so it would bake a nav mesh on top of it. But I have no idea how that would work, as I don't know how the auto-titan AI functions. If there's one glimmer of hope, it's that the multiplayer AI isn't exactly too complex with what it does. The auto-titans have guard and follow mode, which probably wouldn't be too complicated for players to work around when designing maps. This is definitely a hurdle, and a pretty big one I must admit. But if Respawn could get around it, a map editor would be one of, if not the best addition to Titanfall 3. But a map editor is only as good as its features, and there are a few key features that need to be implemented for a map editor to be a success. At the same time, if the map editor has too many advanced features, it may be too overwhelming for players to handle. There needs to be a balance between a rich feature set and ease of use. The first and arguably most important thing to have in any map editor is a good selection of pieces for players to use. A good map editor needs pieces which vary in size, shape, and theme. Ideally, being able to change the texture on pieces would go a long way in helping players create unique level geometry that fits a particular style or theme they're going for. Terrain pieces are also extremely important, and I'd recommend having terrain pieces over a custom terrain editor, as pieces are much easier for players to grasp and understand. While a terrain editor would be overall better, if it's too complicated for players to understand, it will create a situation where the map-making community is only a small group of people. Another absolutely essential feature is allowing map creators to switch between editing mode, pilot mode, and Titan mode. Map makers need to be able to quickly and rapidly iterate on changes they make, especially in a game like Titanfall. Being able to test out wall run routes and advanced movement techniques would be absolutely essential to ensure that the map plays out well as testing whether or not Titans can fit in certain locations. Good object rotation options are also a must-have for obvious reasons. In general, I would say that 1, 5, 15, 30, 45, and 90 degree rotation are all essential. Some other important features would be fine editing tools. A precision object placement mode that drastically slows down how fast you can move objects is vital for lining up pieces together, as well as fixing Z-fighting. Halo 4 and 5's Forge mode also have a magnet system, which can come in handy to seamlessly line up objects to each other. But even better was Halo Reach's coordinate system, where you could edit the precise coordinates of a specific piece and place it exactly where you want it. Another great feature is the ability to group up objects and save them as a prefab. This tool can significantly decrease the time it takes to create maps, and can be extremely handy when making symmetrical maps or copying and pasting. Just being able to move multiple objects at the same time is also a very useful feature, and would be much appreciated. Canvas variety is also extremely important for map creators. Having multiple canvases that all fill different roles is essential for map variety and creating maps with various different themes. A good canvas to start with would be some rolling grass hills with maybe a river running through it, but also having an extremely flat canvas is quite valuable to map editors as well. It's also nice to see a variety of themes, so in addition to the rolling hills, an Arctic shelf canvas, a space canvas, a volcanic lava canvas, a desert canvas, an ocean canvas, and really any other theme can go a long way. Combine good canvas selections with some large terrain pieces like rocks, hills, trees, and fields, and your players will be more than happy with the locations you provide them. For launch, 1 to 3 canvases is perfectly fine so long as a few more come down the line with different content drops. A very simple scripting system would also be a welcomed addition. Things like pressing a button to open a gate or move an object, or trigger volumes which cause something to happen when a player walks through them. Map creators just love interactive objects in general, and Titanfall has some excellent opportunities for it, like the arc streams on the beacon, the toxic liquid in Blood and Rust, or the moving platforms in Into the Abyss. But there are a few more that I can think of that would also be pretty cool. One of my friends suggested a wall that disappears when using phase shift, and I would like to see some sort of energy shield that prevents Titans from entering an area, but not pilots. Map editors also have a particular obsession with breakable objects like vents, wood pallets, and concrete barriers. Map makers love this stuff, and if it's included, you'll probably see entire maps built around them. Invisible walls and boundary volumes are also extremely important for keeping players in the map rather than leaving the area or finding exploit spots. Trait zones are also a nice touch, where upon entering a certain area, the player's base stats can change. A popular use for this feature is a trait zone which lowers player gravity to simulate being in space. Another popular feature is being able to change the map's skybox, weather, and time of day to fit a variety of themes and locations. One aspect of map editors that's extremely important to note is that players will use your features to create things outside of the realm of Titanfall. Giving these players the proper tools to take full advantage of that fact will be greatly appreciated. These are all just the features that I can think of off the top of my head, but there are so many more that I can't possibly list them all. Now with the map editor comes custom game options. These two features are inextricably linked to each other, and a good map editor with bad custom game options or vice versa will hold the experience back from its full potential. The first step in having a good set of custom options is to have the staple game modes that players often modify to fit their desires. This is why I would highly recommend having an infection game mode or giving players the necessary options to make it themselves, as infection is often used as the base game mode for mini-games. However, some other essential game modes include Capture the Flag and King of the Hill. I would also highly recommend including a race game mode, since I can see players creating some amazing parkour race maps with different hazards and death traps. I honestly think those types of maps would spawn a community of their own. As for the essential game options, there are so many that it would probably take me a few hours to explain them all, so I'll only go through the basics. If anyone watching has some other ideas, please write them down in the comment section below. Probably some of the most important options revolve around player health. Total health, health regeneration on or off, health regeneration rate, and health regeneration delay, just to name a few. The same could apply to Titans as well. Total Titan armor, total Titan shields, Titan shield regen yes or no, Titan shield strength, Titan shield regeneration rate, Titan shield regeneration delay, battery armor restored, battery shield restored, and so on. Modifying weapons and damage is also pretty important. Options like global weapon damage to change all the weapons damage, weapon class damage to change damage for a particular type of weapon like shotguns, and individual weapon damage to change a specific weapon like the Mastiff. Loadout options are also pretty important in my opinion. Things like allow custom loadouts, preset loadouts, loadout player traits, loadout weapon bans, and many more. Some other popular options, especially for a game like Titanfall, would be movement traits. Things like base player speed, sprint speed, wall run speed, slide distance, jump height, double jump height, player gravity, disable sprint, disable wall running, disable sliding, disable double jump, etc. I also think that individual team traits could be interesting as well, allowing players to make either team have different settings. Death settings are also pretty important and can be absolutely essential for creating certain game modes. Options like respawn time, respawn with team, number of player lives, number of team lives, respawn player traits, and respawn player traits duration. One interesting game mode I can think of would be Pilots vs Titans, where one team has only one life per player but spawns in Titans, and the other has infinite lives but play as pilots. Scoring options are also extremely important, like points on kill, points on Titan kill, points on AI kill, points on flag capture, death point subtraction, flag carrier kill points, etc. Another set of options unique to Titanfall would be, well, Titanfall settings. Things like Titan build time on kill, build time on Titan damage, build time on AI kill, maximum Titans per team, spawn in Titan, disable Titans, and many more. There are honestly hundreds, if not thousands, of custom game options to consider, and I can't possibly list them all. It probably isn't feasible to actually include every option I would want, but from my experience of using a few different map editors and custom games, the more options, the better. With both a map editor and custom game system, I think Titanfall 3 could offer experiences for all sorts of niche players. As I mentioned in the last video, competitive players might feel left out if they don't have a dedicated ranked playlist, limited weapon pool, and competitive map design. But with custom maps and game modes, competitive players could create their own experience within the game's sandbox and tweak settings to their liking. The same could be said about more casual players who want a more simple experience or some interesting mini-games to play. While it isn't a replacement for a ranked or minigame matchmaking playlist, I think it would alleviate some of the pressure from both types of players and allow Respawn to stick to their middle-of-the-road casual competitive balance that I've come to love about the franchise. Now for the last part of this video, I'm going to explain some of the pitfalls that many map editors end up falling down. I could nitpick forever about a lot of the small issues, but for the sake of time, I'm only going to bring up the really big problems. The issues that can potentially doom the entire feature to fail. The first of these potential problems is not having a functional and user-friendly private lobby system. Titanfall isn't a franchise that has a problem with buggy releases, so I think it's safe to assume that Titanfall 3 will have a functional private lobby system. But there are also some private lobby features that are extremely important to have. Being able to promote a new person to party leader without having to start a new lobby and reinvite everyone else is a pretty important one, since one of the best ways to get people into your lobby is with the promise that they'll be able to play their own map after yours. Another important feature is being able to cap the amount of total players who can join your lobby. Some people will be making maps for specific game modes that only require a few players, something like a 2v2 LTS map for example. Often when people are trying to test their maps, they invite many more players than they actually need, since they know that not everyone will join. It seems like a small issue, but when you have 50 friends all trying to cram themselves into a 4-player lobby, this can cause a ton of frustration that will make people not even want to bother with the map editor feature at all. And lastly, the easier you make it to host and join a custom games lobby, the more popular the feature will become. Halo has started using a custom games browser, but I'm personally not the biggest fan of this feature, as it's really difficult to actually find something you want to play in a big list of hosted games. It's also important to note that custom games is an extremely social experience, and just joining a bunch of random players who you don't know isn't nearly as fun. Not to mention, as I said previously, players usually join lobbies in the hopes that they can be promoted to leader, and people rarely promote players that they don't know. Luckily, Titanfall already has the necessary feature to help people find lobbies. By integrating networks into custom games, players can search for a network which hosts the types of maps and game modes that they're interested in. There could be entire networks for casual minigames, competitive tournaments, map testing, and so on. At the press of a button, the host of a custom games lobby can invite a large group of players to their game. A good feature for network invites would be being able to write a short message to explain what the lobby is about. Something like, testing new version of my map, willing to promote other players afterwards. These networks would be great for content creators as well, as one of the best places to find cool maps is on YouTube, where people usually record some gameplay of their maps for everyone to see for themselves. Back in Halo Reach, map showcase videos on YouTube used to net hundreds of thousands, if not millions of views each. If people could shout out their network in their videos, then viewers of the video could easily join that network to receive invites from the map creator or other like-minded fans. I also think it would be a good idea for invites from the network owner and/or admins to appear differently on screen than network members, since most players will be encouraged to join games from the network owners rather than just a random member. Another extremely important feature for any map editor or custom games creator is a file share system for creators to host their maps or game modes so that other players can download them. Some people aren't really interested in making content themselves, but still love to download and play other people's creations with their own friends. The file share enables people to play maps and game modes without needing to know or be invited by the creator. It's an absolutely essential feature, and without it the entire map editor will certainly fail. Most people will have their own groups of friends or entire networks that they want to play custom maps with, rather than with a map creator or their network. Another trap that I've seen other map editors fall into is requiring everyone in the lobby to download the map prior to playing it. This is just a frustrating and tedious annoyance that nobody wants to deal with, but it also has a much larger negative impact of disabling players from joining mid-game. There are a lot of times you start a custom game with less than the optimal players in the hopes that other people will join throughout the match. This is one way of keeping your players entertained while they're waiting for the lobby to fill up, as sitting around and waiting for the 10 to 15 minutes it can often take for people to filter in is quite boring. The last thing you want to have happen is to get a few people in your lobby, only for them to get bored and leave before more people join. If there's one thing that can kill your map editor, it's when people have spent hours upon hours making a new map, but can't get enough players to play it with. It makes people wonder if there's really a point to making new maps if they can't play on it, and being able to play something while the lobby fills up is a great way to keep players engaged. Speaking of player retention, the last point I want to make is how important it is to support your map editor post-launch. Just adding a few new pieces or another canvas whenever a new DLC comes out really goes a long way in supporting the creators, and it will definitely drive player excitement for a fairly low amount of effort on the developer's part. And that's about all the suggestions that I can think of so far. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of other suggestions I could make, but I simply don't have the time. And on that note, I think it's time that I wrap up this video. If you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns about any of the ideas that I raised in this video, feel free to share them in the comments section below. I would absolutely love to hear your ideas, and I'm always open for a friendly conversation. Thanks so much for watching, and look out for my next video where I'll discuss game mode ideas for Titanfall 3.